Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is The Quiet American. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of The Quiet American with leather cover, designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. The Quiet American is a 1955 novel written by Graham Greene, and it is partly inspired by his trip to Vietnam in the early 1950s and his contact with the Americans he met there. Greene was a giant of the 20th century British literature and left a large body of work, which besides novels includes travel and non-fiction books, plays and short stories. Most of his writings are thrillers influenced by his travels and his short service during the war in the British intelligence, the MI6, the same one Ian Fleming and his spy novel hero James Bond served. All Greene's novels contain acute observations and analysis at which in general the English writers excel. Well, perhaps not so much now. Many of his books have been adapted into films such as The Quiet American, The End of the Affair or Our Man in Havana. I am a great fan of Greene and in general the 20th century English literature. What is The Quiet American about? It is about a loveless triangular relationship where the old party is trying to keep what the new party is trying to gain. And this conflict somewhat mirrors the political situation in Vietnam of the early 1950s. The story is also about the vacuum created by the end of the European colonialism and the struggle to substitute it by either the oppressive socialism or the capitalist imperialism. With me personally, having experienced the former, would definitely prefer the latter. Now, a bit of the plot. The story takes place in the early 1950s in Vietnam, which at that time was part of the French Indochina, and revolves around three characters. The narrator, Thomas Fowler, who is an English journalist reporting on the colonial war between the French and the Vietnamese. Then there is Alden Pyle, a young American working for the American Embassy in Saigon, and last is Phuong, a young Vietnamese girl living with Fowler. There also is Phuong's older sister, who is working behind the scenes to get Phuong married to the best possible candidate. And Fowler is not one of them since he is already married back in England. The story begins with Fowler being informed by the French police inspector that Pyle's body was found, and he together with Phuong are the suspects. Fowler, through his narration, retraces the whole period he knew Pyle, starting in a cafe in Saigon where they met, and then his introduction of Pyle to Phuong and her sister. Immediately, the sister decides Pyle has more to offer than Fowler, and right away starts working on bringing the two together, which is greatly helped by the fact that Pyle thinks he loves Phuong. Pyle follows Fowler when he takes a trip up north to report on the military campaign there. They have man-to-man talk, and Pyle lets him know that he is in a better position to take care of Phuong and intends on marrying her. As expected, Fowler doesn't agree, and this starts a rivalry between the two, which carries on for the rest of the book until the tragic and unforeseen departure of Pyle. And that's the basic plot. Did I like The Quiet American? I did. A large part of the credit goes to Graham Greene and his writing style, which can make any story interesting. Not to say that the story on its own is not engaging, it is. The plot is a personal drama that mirrors the political situation of that time and place, which led to the later American military involvement in Vietnam. The book is metaphorical and the characters are somewhat symbolic. Fowler represents all European powers. He is old, tired and beaten up and afraid of being alone, but also experienced and cautious, kind of like European countries desperately trying to hold on to their colonies so they wouldn't lose contact with the younger and seemingly happier outer world. but instinctively they know it is a futile effort in the rapidly changing global political environment. Payol symbolizes America. He is young, handsome, energetic, and confident, but at the same time naive and a bit impulsive. He was impregnably armored by his good intentions and his ignorance, says Fowler. And further, I wish sometimes you had a few bad motives. You might understand a little more about human beings. Payol's knowledge doesn't come from experience, but from theoretical reading about how the world should be. Similar to the United States, usually acting much faster and with more confidence than the Europeans, but sometimes, or looking at the recent history, we could say often, it backfires. Since you cannot force others to do what they really don't care for. Well, you can force them if you have a bigger gun, but the question is for how long and at what price. And this brings us to Vietnam and Quang, who is the object of the change and represents the emerging new nations, what we used to call the Third World. She's very young, just starting her adult life, not mature enough to be fully independent, and preferring to have somebody older on her side to resolve the more difficult problems in exchange for her youth and company. She is very much like many new countries, in this case Vietnam, which is forming into a modern political entity as a result of the death of European colonialism. The new countries are not mature enough to be fully independent, so they need to ally themselves with the more developed and powerful force, which back then was either capitalist West or communist East. Quang is more practical than the two men. She thinks about survival when Fowler and Payol are more sentimental and think about loneliness and love. And this is what we can call cultural shock. But it is caused more by hierarchy of human needs than cultural differences. And these individual needs can also be applied to societies and countries. In this specific case, Vietnam, which is fighting for survival and to satisfy its basic needs, where the developed countries such as Britain and America can afford to worry about fulfilling their ideological and moral wants or goals, since their survival is taken for granted. I think this difference is summed up very well by Fowler when he says, "They don't believe in anything either. You and your like are trying to make a war with the help of people who just aren't interested. They don't want communism, they want enough rice. They don't want to be shot at, and they want one day to be much the same as another. They don't want our white skins around telling them what they want. Thoughts are luxury. Do you think the peasant thinks of God and democracy when he gets inside his mud hut at night?" This pretty much applies in general to the whole world and was probably overlooked and responsible for the many post-war Western military failures, including the recent disaster in Afghanistan. Actually, the failures were political and the military campaigns were the victims of it. Anyway, Quang is with the Englishman because he came first, but she sees the American as able to give her more, and there lies the dilemma, not so much for her but rather for the two men. Basically they are buyers, therefore each one needs to think what he has to offer and makes it more enticing for Quang by convincing her that what he has is what she wants. Actually, similar to the colonized places, she is not very well understood since we only know her through Fowler's descriptions and conversations he has with her, which are limited because of the linguistic barrier, and because of it she is presented more as a shadow than a person, grey and two-dimensional. Payol is the quiet American, where a more appropriate word might be mysterious, since throughout the book there is a question of what he is doing in Vietnam. Also he is rather vocal, but he becomes quiet once he is dead. So perhaps that's why Green chose this title, since it sounded better than The Dead American. There is a discrepancy between what Payol says and what he does. His title is Economic Advisor, but his actions go far beyond the economy. He is seemingly the most innocent of the three, a Boy Scout, which doesn't mean he is harmless. He wants to make everybody happy, but through his actions he is the most destructive of the three. I think Fowler summed him up very well in this sentence from the book. I never knew a man who had better motives for all the trouble he caused. Green through Pyle is giving us his opinion of America. I do not agree with all of Green's views. I appreciate America's efforts in stopping the spread of communism and leftist dictatorships, but then I have the benefit of hindsight. When talking specifically about Vietnam, Green was right about the coming disaster. Vietnam would probably end in the exactly same political place without the American involvement, which brought a huge amount of suffering, human and material losses, and hurt feelings. Maybe the problem was the French colonial system and its inability of letting things just go, contrary to the British, who were more practical and flexible with decolonization. The French not only had the disastrous war in Indochina, but also in Algeria, and France still today is holding on to more colonial possessions than any other country. To sum it up, in The Quiet American, Graham Greene had the foresight to lay a foundation for the coming disaster of the American military campaign in Vietnam, and its culprit, which was the American way of thinking and assuming the others thought the same. It is also a love story without love, where each one is motivated by their self-interest. One doesn't want to be alone, another one needs a soul to save, and the last one wants her life to be as easy as possible. Also, Greene, through Fowler, as usual, injects a bit of his own struggle and confusion about faith and religion. Death was the only absolute value in my world. Lose life and one would lose nothing again forever. I envied those who could believe in God, and I distrusted them. I felt they were keeping their courage up with a fable of the changeless and the permanent. Death was far more certain than God, and with death there would be no longer the possibility of love dying. Anyway, the book is a great read because of the personal story and its connection to and the indirect analysis of the causes that led to the Vietnam War. There are a couple of film adaptations of The Quiet American. The first one from the 1958 misses the book's message, probably because of the time it was made during the McCarthy era and America's paranoia about communism and general anti-American sentiments, but the second one, made in 2001 and starring Michael Caine and Brendan Fraser, is pretty faithful to the novel and makes a good visual reference to the book. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transformed into a hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A naturally tan hide I buy from a tannery in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First I designed the cover, which what I did here. I found this vintage poster of Saigon with two Vietnamese women in the foreground. It kind of reminded me of Phuong and her sister behind her, with her hand over her shoulder, subtly guiding her. In the background there is colonial Saigon, and I thought all of it went nicely with the book. This is the back with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to the leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100, but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel. And for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name. And the winner will receive the book. So, if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here, and until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.